Hello, I'm Chris Baynham-Hughes. I'm part of Red Hat's Open Innovation Labs team covering EMEA. We work with our customers to accelerate transformation through the successful adoption of cloud-native practices and technology. As part of delivering that vision, our residencies build long-lived, cross-functional product teams capable of delivering sustained competitive advantage to their own organisation. Okay, so today I'm going to offer up an opinionated vision for what it means to be a cloud-native organisation. We're going to look at why the organisations are investing in that vision, how they can set themselves up for success in that journey, and we'll pull that all together by linking what we've discussed to a few of the most common challenges that we see with our customers. So let's get started with some definitions. As always, the industry is swimming in buzzwords. I've lost count of the many different types of transformation there are out there and the number of three-letter additions that have been put on the word DevOps. So to ensure there's clarity over what we're talking about, I'll start by offering up the definitions we use with our customers to be sure that, well, for the purposes of today at least, we've got a shared understanding. Okay, so when we talk about transformation, we define that as unlocking new lines of business through technology. What we've observed is that organizations that are able to do this most effectively have adopted cloud-native business models. So what do we mean by cloud-native? Well, firstly, we're not talking about where the applications are being hosted. This is not necessarily about being in the cloud. We describe cloud-native as the way in which the organization operates. It's their working practices, the architecture, and the organizational structure to efficiently unlock new lines of business through technology. If I was to put it a different way, cloud-native organizations are winning in the market right now because of how they approach the problem space and how they are organized to respond to it. So why are organizations on this cloud-native journey? Well, one of the most interesting drivers we hear is that the focus on cost reduction is no longer paying dividends. As an industry, we've gone so far down the cost reduction curve that there's little left to cut. The law of diminishing returns means that putting anything significant on the bottom line is very hard. So as organizations have sought to plumb those depths, we're also seeing those savings come at a price. In fact, the COVID pandemic has highlighted some of these previously unseen costs as organizations are so stripped back that they are unable to respond, or at least they've been slow to respond to the pandemic and the shift in working practices. The same is true about responding to new competition, especially challenger offerings from new startups unburdened by legacy systems. Cutting costs too far has left some organizations brittle. They lack agility and are unable to respond to the unexpected, having sacrificed resilience to cut costs. If you're interested in learning more about resilience and how you can apply resilience engineering principles into your organization to drive greater business agility, then do check out my man Tom Geraghty's talk titled Resilience Engineering, the Future of DevOps, on the modern software development track. You'll love it. Tell your friends. Now, cloud-native firms take a different view of the world. They don't just impact the bottom line through efficiency. Over time, they also target a greater proportion of their spend towards value creation and top-line growth. They do this first by collapsing the complexity of their infrastructure. This is how the cloud providers are able to run football field-sized data centers efficiently. So it's a reasonably familiar story. If you take the systems administrators that you have responsible for managing, say, 5 unique servers, they could manage 50 or 500 identical servers. And when the costs are exposed, it's amazing how quickly the bespoke elements of these servers aren't quite so important anymore. The hyperscalers have certainly given credibility to the commoditization of infrastructure. Of course, the other development that enables this abstraction is the platform layer. Cloud-native organizations put in place enabling constraints. So what do I mean by that? Well, if I may use a sporting example, think of a game of football. As children, we soon realised that if we didn't have touchlines, it meant that Robbie Davis and Steve-O would be on the other side of the park, one with the ball, the other one trying to get it. The rest of us would be waiting around by the goals for them to come back so we could get on with the game. Now, once the enabling constraints of touchlines were put in, everybody could enjoy the game. Players and even spectators. We could have even monetized it, although somehow we never really managed that. Can't think why. But yeah, so in the platform economy, automation and platform services are these enabling constraints. They deliver self-service environments and common components that can be reused by all. They enable sufficient developer freedom so they can build best-in-class solutions and pick their technologies, but they also enable that solution to be determined quickly because the guardrails around the platform narrow the options in a helpful way. This adds up to enabling product teams to deliver faster to market. Spending on infrastructure goes down and it's commoditized and run at hyperscale. There's initial investment in the platform, but over time the total cost of ownership to the platform decreases. Combined, these reductions enable a greater proportion of IT spend on better serving customers through the product portfolio. And those products are delivered more quickly for reasons we'll discuss in a moment. Okay, so let's first look at the ingredients to successfully become cloud native. Transformation is socio-technical in nature. Each of these areas must be addressed for transformation to be successful. So many transformation attempts hit the glass ceiling of improvements because they haven't got sufficient balance across these areas. Why? Well, I think this quote from the Harvard Business Review, Study into Digital Transformation, provides us with an insight. It's easy to spend money on technology. We want to believe that there's some new tool, it's going to take away all our problems, but true exploitation of any technology requires process and cultural issues to be addressed. But it's hard, right? As the quote states, it's difficult to change process and culture is the hardest. So I'd argue there's also another elephant in the room that this quote doesn't bring out, and that's organizational structure. In many organizations, this is even harder to address than culture, as the org structure is a proxy for how power and status are derived. We'll touch on the importance of organizational structure later. Okay, so let's dive into the models to understand the how. How can we can deliver on the cloud native vision. Just before we do though, I'd like to quickly introduce their source, our Global Transformation Office, or GTO. The GTO is led by Andrew Clay Schaefer, and the entire team have been at the forefront of the DevOps movement and transformation for the past decade or so. If you've read anything on the subject, you'll have no doubt read their work, from the Phoenix Project to the DevOps Handbook, and many, many more. At Red Hat, we combine their thought leadership with the experience we have in delivery. The result is an iterative delivery model. If you'd like to know more about what we do after this session, then please pop by our virtual booth or get in touch with me directly. Okay, broadly aligned with people and culture, we have Andrew's 5 elements model and open culture. Jabe's 3 economies aligns around processes and practices. Naturally, we also have opinions on the technology, but we won't be covering that today. I did mention earlier there was an elephant in the room, which was organizational structure. For this, we take our guidance from the outstanding work of Matthew Skelton and Manuel Pace in their book, Team Topologies. To be clear, they are not part of Red Hat. However, their work has helped us evolve and articulate what we're doing. If you've not had a chance to read Team Topologies yet, I thoroughly recommend it. Diving deeper into the models, we'll start with Jabe's 3 economies. So to date, there have been 2 well-defined economies when it comes to the delivery of IT. The economy of scale and the economy of differentiation. To understand them and why a 3rd economy is required, we need to look at their games and how they score points in those games. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's take the economy of differentiation. They score points in their game by creating difference and diversity. This is where your product development teams play. They deliver competitive advantage for the organisation through innovative products, new routes to market, the feature sets that customers want. They score points through velocity, the number of features they get through the door, and their ability to understand their customers and respond. All of these things score points for them. To help them win the game, they need speed and a close affinity with their customers. Now let's look at the economy of scale. This is typically where your operations teams sit. They win their game through stability, resilience, and cost efficiency. They seek to regulate velocity as they prize uptime, and change brings risks to that. They look to run things at scale. This generally drives out the variety of what they will support. So we have a tension. We have two gears that grind against each other during transmission. It's not that their mission is different. If you asked both sides what they do here, what they're here to do is, they would no doubt respond along the lines of, well, we're here to deliver world-class IT. It's when you ask them how they do that, what it looks like, that we get the divergence. And it's all because of how they score points in the game. They're siloed, unable to empathise with each other due to competing incentives. We need a clutch. We need to create a third economy that will enable balance between the other two. One they can both utilise to score points and win their games. This is how high-performing cloud-native organisations are winning. They have facilitated and are growing their scope economy. It means we get to have our cake and eat it. So what exists in the scope economy? Well, a shared platform provides the basis for the scope economy to exist. However, it's what sits on top of the platform that transforms capability. The scope economy consists of common assets that increase in value the more they are consumed. These are well-formed functions, data sets, and common configurations that allow faster differentiation at scale. As an example of such an asset, let's take authentication. Authentication is critical to all applications. If we travel back in time to the creation of an application, the team will have realised that they needed an authentication method. They go out and search for one in the business and find there isn't anything suitable. So they build their own. They ask operations in the scale economy to support it. The next team comes along, needing an authentication method, and approach the first team to reuse their module. They agree and we start to use it. Great. Only their needs are slightly different and they keep asking for changes. Eventually, the teams fall out over a lack of flexibility or too much demand, and the second team build their own approach. Maybe they find a more suitable method for their needs and a different technology as a result. Now operations need to be able to support two different authentication protocols. Now scale that issue across your estate. Before you know it, you've got a beautiful mess of authentication which operations can't run efficiently at scale as they have too many different approaches. You've got wastage through duplication of effort as each product team is developing and maintaining their bespoke solution. Wouldn't it be better if there was a common product that any existing or new application could use to handle authentication? This could be managed by a small team to ensure that it met the needs of its users and delivered as a service. So the more applications that use it, the more valuable it becomes. Operations are happy because they can support running it at scale, resilient as hell, and very efficiently. Those in the differentiation economy are happy too, as they don't have to waste time building it, and only have to test the integration points because they know it works. Their cognitive load is reduced and they can focus on what differentiates the product that they're building. They become more customer-centric. So to summarise, there is a friction between the two current economies, the economy of scale and the economy of differentiation. This is caused because they are incentivized differently, they score points differently. To remove this friction between the two economies, we must create a third economy, the economy of scope. To build this economy, you must collaborate to build a shared platform as an interface. This is a Kubernetes platform and those well-formed functions, datasets, and common configurations. These are assets that increase in value the more that they are consumed. The platform as an interface enables differentiation to develop products faster and become more customer-centric, whilst enabling the scale economy to run the platform as an interface with high resilience, low cost and efficiency. In short, you get your cake and eat it. Everybody's scoring points, everybody's happy. Now, let's take a look at how the organisation gets in the way of achieving this. Andrew's 5 elements model exposes other tensions within the majority of organisations. It identifies 5 key capabilities necessary to deliver IT. Note, I said capabilities. These are not roles, departments, or silos. That's where the tension lies, as many customers are organised based upon these areas. The architectural team, development teams, operations, lines of business, management, all scoring points in their games differently. The core principle behind the DevOps movement was to break out of the silos, break them down, and break those silos between development and operations. But as I think many variations on the word DevOps have popped up since have shown and sort of demonstrate, it's not the whole end-to-end picture. Andrew's extended the concept to be more holistic. Despite the apparent boredom of the guy sat down third from the right here, this is the room you want to be in, where these sorts of questions are being asked and solved collaboratively by a group inclusive of these capabilities, where empathy is built and points are scored in every game. Breaking the silos down facilitates the environment and team to exploit these 5 opportunities. A big question remains though, if we're not organised into teams and departments that match these 5 elements, how are we organised? How can we optimise our teams for flow to ensure the customer centricity that we seek? To answer this question, we need to learn a lesson that Melvin Conway offered up over half a century ago. Conway's law states that organisations which design systems are constrained to produce designs which are the copies of communication structures of these organisations. This goes a long way to explaining why siloed organisations will tend to produce monolithic applications. Teams work within what they can control. If collaboration is made too difficult due to the communication structures, then they will simply operate without that interaction and are likely to create monoliths. As we've seen earlier in the presentation, collaboration to identify, decouple and reuse functions, data and configurations, building the scope economy, is how high-performing cloud-native organizations are winning in the platform era. The scope economy evolves and the teams must evolve with it. If we go back to the authentication example we looked at earlier, it starts life in the differentiation economy as part of something bigger. At some point it gets decoupled and moves into the scope economy, but the authentication function now becomes a product in its own right and will need to be managed as one, as the functions required are not static. For a period at least, further work will be required for it to meet the needs of other teams and use cases. So the teams responsible evolve to and manage it as a product, and the way that it interacts with other teams will evolve from collaboration to ultimately an as-a-service model. This evolutionary nature of both the teams and the interaction methods are core. In team topologies, Matthew and Manuel identify 4 team types and 3 interaction modes. Now, I'm not going to go into great depth here, as I'm just going to focus on 2 of the team types and 2 of the interaction modes. Naturally, if you're intrigued enough to want to know more, the book is a fantastic place to start and it's thoroughly recommended. If you missed it, I spoke yesterday about cloud-native team topologies. You'll find that in the modern software development track. And since the Six Nations rugby tournament is on, I've used rugby teams to explore these team topologies. The recording is available on demand, so do check it out. The two team types I'd like to focus on here are the platform teams and the stream-aligned teams. In the platform era, the platform and the common components, what I described earlier as the platform as an interface, are abstracted and delivered as a product by the platform teams. The business is represented by the stream-aligned teams. They sit in the differentiation economy and would be constructed in line with the 5 elements. Whilst to start with, the platform and teams, platform and stream-aligned teams would interact collaboratively. The aim is for stream-aligned teams to consume the platform as a service. The collaboration allows stream-aligned teams and platform teams to empathize with each other and understand each other's needs. Once sufficiently understood and a viable platform has been built, interaction can slowly move to deliver through an as-a-service model, removing the overhead of collaboration until a change occurs that is significant enough to warrant returning to a collaborative interaction mode to resolve it. Okay, so I appreciate that's a lot to take in and to think about, and that we haven't even got into the what, i.e. what are we going to do on the ground to implement these models. So whilst we don't have time to go into implementation today, we need to talk about one more ingredient. Without it, lasting change won't be achieved. It's culture. The change we've outlined today requires a strong, open culture to accelerate and sustain it. Culture is the secret sauce to any organisation. I can speak for hours on culture, but in order to provide a real example of the difference culture makes in transformation, let's look at fostering a culture of experimentation. It's certainly high up the list when it comes to differentiating between low and high-performing organisations. So the problems today we face are complex. As discussed earlier, they are socio-technical in nature, so we're already at that intersect of culture, practices, and organisational structure. Naturally, we want to reduce the risk of any actions that we take, and the traditional approach to reducing risk is to analyse, to create an options paper, a report, or a slide deck. It's to run a study to evaluate options. I think Mike Tyson managed to articulate the problem here when he said, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Essentially, until we do it, we don't really know, and crucially, we don't get good evidence, or good data to evolve our understanding. The alternative is to think, how might we do something today that would improve our understanding of the problem? What is our hypothesis, and what experiment could we run in order to validate it? What could we do? The journey to cloud native is evolutionary. Open cultures foster experimentation, manage cognitive load, develop psychological safety, engender purpose and passion. The cloud and cloud native technologies were born in open source. If you want to be a cloud native company, it's easy to argue that you need a culture that fosters what created it in the first place. Okay, so before we wrap up, let's just bring it all together by having a quick whistle-stop tour of some of the common problems organisations face whilst transforming. The things that create the glass ceilings to gains. Some of them may well sound familiar. Okay, time to market. Everybody wants to go faster. Nobody wants a 9, 6, or even a 3-month release cycle anymore. Effective product development requires fast feedback, so issues can be fixed and the product becomes more customer-centric. You have a better chance of building the right thing. DevOps was going to get us there, right? It was going to go some way to solving the water scrum fall problem that we saw through Agile implementations. These were caused because only the development team were doing Agile and everybody else was following a slow, gated, process-heavy, waterfall-style siloed practices. The origins of DevOps were in a cultural movement. Somewhere along the way, it got interpreted as CI/CD, pipeline, and some infrastructure as code, and then you were DevOps, right? So these are technical enablers of DevOps, but only address the technology. It doesn't meet the key tenet of DevOps, which is to break down the silos and create long-lived, product-centric teams that own a product end-to-end. They're empowered and enabled to build, deploy, and operate. The 5 elements model looks to address and extend the elimination of silos. Adopting the right team topologies minimizes the friction that harms flow. And adopting an open culture makes those changes stick. Scaling problems are super common. The mistake here is believing that if we scale the number of agile teams, we'll become more agile as an organization. Scaling agile teams just means you have more agile teams. The real challenge is how we identify, share, and enable the reuse of common components. The 3 economies directly addresses this, supported by the 5 elements, team topologies, and an open culture. As we've just mentioned, the organizational structure often creates friction between teams. We see silos trying to solve complex problems on their own. So for example, we often see operations trying to solve speed to market problems by building a Kubernetes platform. We'll build a platform and they'll love it for us. It's going to be great. But they don't speak to their development teams, their customers. They certainly don't speak to them enough to understand their needs. And they often spend too long building it. And it ends up over-engineered, not fit for purpose, and shadow IT is already developed. Anybody out there have any issue with cloud services being paid for on credit cards and expensed by any chance? At the same time, the developers are trying to solve the speed to market issue themselves by adopting Agile. But it ends up causing more problems as all the other things necessary to release software are not Agile. So we're back to the water scrum fall problem. Developers get frustrated and potential value is delayed or wasted as it sits there being released, and often you get attrition problems. We talked today about the 5 elements and team topology, how the 5 elements and team topologies address these issues, especially when they're combined with an open culture. The productivity trap is super common and relates to the focus on cost reduction that we looked at earlier. Poorly executed automation examples implementation examples are a classic manifestation of this issue. Teams are struggling under the workload, so they're given an automation tool like Ansible so they can automate their way out of the problem. Only they're so busy doing business as usual that they can't learn the new tool. Their cognitive load is high and the psychological safety is low because they can't afford to fail. They haven't got time to. So adoption doesn't happen, wasting the money spent on the tooling, and they're unable to innovate because they have no slack to learn, adapt, and maximize the return on investment. We're trying to solve complex problems and hit moving targets. This is why Agile should help us do that efficiently. Yet the approach to risk reduction in traditional organizations is to analyze their way out of a solution rather than design an experiment, probe, sense, and respond their way to a solution. Alleviating these problems requires a shift in thinking and culture to foster a different approach. Finally, we see old methods being applied to new paradigms. For example, lift and shift of applications rather than re-engineering to exploit the benefits of cloud-native practices. It's like getting horses to pull your car rather than use the engine. The symptoms we see as a result of all these problems are slow time to market, monolithic applications, wastage, low organizational agility, burnout of staff, low morale, low adoption of new technology, low innovation, inefficiency, poor return on investment, and growing challenger competition. They can all be addressed. Remember, cloud native is about the way organizations operate and approach the problem space. One of the key success factors is that they continually evolve and have the structures in place to do that. We can't predict the future challenges and opportunities that technology will throw at us, but we can improve our resilience, our ability to respond and evolve through our culture, practices, and organizational structure. Now I'll open up for questions now in a minute. We've covered our opinionated view on the why and the how today. I hope this has stimulated some thoughts and ideas, some good questions. Of course, if you'd like to discuss what we do when we engage with, to catalyse this change with our customers, then please come and talk to us. We love an open discussion and an opportunity to hear and learn from you too. Okay, thanks for listening. Let's open for questions.